Hello. So, thank you to Leah and Gwen and all the staff here at Sewanee for doing this and inviting me back. Um, really, really happy to just be in this place right now. The lecture that I have for you today is called For the Audience. This lecture is a first draft, and you are welcome to share any feedback you might have afterwards. Um, Really, the essence of it is that in my practice as a playwright, um, the one thing that I know I can't avoid is the audience. And even in thinking about preparing this particular speech, it came to my mind that a lot of these thoughts that I'm articulating or about to articulate, I would not have done if I didn't have you as an audience to speak to, right? And so even though that's a very rudimentary observation, I think it's worth our attention as writers to recognize the importance of that relationship and how fundamental it is, and think about some of the ways that it might inform our process. And I think it also informs an implicit question that writers are always trying to answer and answer better, which is, what is my voice? What is my unique voice? What do I have to say? How do I offer the gifts that I have as a writer to the world? And I think that often we think about this as an internal process, that it's about uncovering our own inhibitions or looking at our own history, our own lives, our own secrets, and having the courage to share them. And I think that's true. But I also think that a voice necessitates an ear. You need a receiver for the conversation to happen. And so when we think about our voice when we're speaking, I don't think we tend to think always about how we sound, right? But yet we still have unique voices. And one of the things that determines how we sound and how our voice develops is the audience that we have for our voice. Our voices are developed in the world. They're not developed only within ourselves. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And a couple of provocations or things that sparked this idea for me to talk about. One was that I felt like there was a disconnect. I feel like there's a disconnect in our common discourse in the theater about our audiences, and then my experience as an audience member and as a playwright. And I think part of this is just the natural tendency we have to complain, which it's great. I mean, it's fun, it's amazing, it's bonding. So all good. But I think that sometimes when we're talking about theater audiences, we tend to complain that, oh, they're too white, too wealthy, too old, and we want to diversify the audience. Of course, I agree with wanting to diversify the audience, but I don't know that we do ourselves or audiences any favors by sort of giving them a blanket characterization. And I also feel like I'm definitely a regular theater goer myself, and I am getting older, but I don't see myself quite in that light. And I feel like the people that come to see theater don't necessarily see themselves in that light either. And I think that when I see an audience walk into a theater, I just feel a sense of, gratitude for the fact that they showed up. Something about the fact that they were there, and I'm not saying they're all great people and they're all open to all ideas and they're all going to be a good audience for my play, but the fact that they come and sit and watch, in and of itself, I think is a gesture that they're listening, that they're ready to receive something, right? And so I think it's important, for me anyway, to honor that, and also to think about what our response is to that gesture the audience gives when they come. Like, what is it that we feel like we want to do with them or to them? So I think that if we just analyze that, that says a lot about our voice, about what we want, right? What experience do we want to give to them? What do we want to see them go through? What gives us pleasure in observing the audience? So that's one thing. Another provocation was that, I got an email from a marketing team at a theater, and it's not anything particular about this theater because essentially all theaters do this, but they're trying to get an audience, and so they asked me a question, which was, who should come to see your play and why? And I was like, oh! I was like very immediately repulsed by that question, and I thought, wow, like, I don't even know, and I didn't actually answer that. They gave me the option to answer them or not, and that's one of the ones I declined. But I thought about that question and why it was so difficult for me to begin to address it. And I think part of it is that when I'm in the initial process of writing a play, my audience is me. I imagine or assume that if I'm interested, you'll be interested. And then sometimes you teach me that, actually you're not, and then I make adjustments from there. But I want to hold on to the possibility that my specific interests and expressions are, in fact, quite universal in some way, or that they can be accessed. And I think along the development process, there's ways that you have to work on making sure that your messaging can be received and all these things. But somehow putting that question front and center felt me become immediately alienated from the audience, that I was now looking at them as a demographic or as a particular type. And that made me somehow uncomfortable. So that's like the immediate way in. There's also a longer way in, which I will now expand upon. When I'm in my practice as a playwright, there's this question that I have to keep turning over and over again in my mind. And that question is, what is a play? Like, what actually is a play? And I don't know why I'm obsessed with that question, because it seems like if I've written plays, I guess I know enough about them to write them, so like, why do I need to keep trying to define them? Is it actually like maybe an enterprise that's kind of fruitless or unproductive? But in reality, what happens for me is that the more plays I write, the more I wonder like what they are, and the more I wonder why they are. And I go into this sort of existential loop of asking myself, like, but what is it? Why is it? How is it? So I think one of the difficulties is that there's really several simultaneous definitions for what a play actually is. One is, I guess a kind of conventional definition that we can apply, like Aristotle's definition of tragedy adapted to a play, which is a play is an imitation of an action, right? So the same way that a painting of an apple is an imitation of an apple, a play about a family uncovering deep, dark secrets is an imitation of a family uncovering deep, dark secrets. And that, I think, is somewhat useful, or at least has been used quite a bit. So that's one definition of a play. But then I'm like, okay, yeah, but what is it really like? What else is it, And I think also sometimes they might look at a play as a performed public ritual. The origins of theater in cultures really all around the world are very closely tied to religion and religious rites. So really both in terms of form and in terms of content, historically speaking, theater and religious rites are kind of cut from the same cloth. The difference is, one of the differences is that religious rites tend to have predetermined expressions and meanings, and they're understood to be of divine origin, and plays hold expressions and meanings that are unpredictable, and they're fallible, and they're universally debatable because they're understood to be of human origin. But I think it's useful to recognize that the origins of these rites really all around the world, if you go back far enough, seem to link. So that's one way we can look at a play, is we can say, okay, it's a performed public ritual. I also think that, like, in experimental theater, this is a definition that really is leaned on a lot, because, you know, you can't say that every public ritual is a play, but every play is a public ritual, right? And so I think when we're questioning, like, what is the form, what is it about, how do we have a relationship to the audience in a new way, we lean back on, like, what is the primordial essence of this thing, it's a ritual, and then we imagine what's the ritual for now, and we can kind of rethink about what theater might be. But even, I think it's important to recognize that even theater today, conventional theater, is still ritualistic, and probably the best example of that is the curtain call, right, at the end. You know, when the play is over, we fully expect the actors to come out and bow, and, like, we're gonna clap, right? And, you know, we indicate our like for the play not by whether or not we clap, but like by how enthusiastic we are, right? If we just don't clap at all, it's like, whoa, that's seriously out of bounds, right? Because we're breaking our part as an audience of the ritual of a play, right? And so it's a whole different thing if we're just like decline, right? There are plays that forego the curtain call intentionally, and that creates this real sense of disruption, I think, for the audience, that really forces you to, like, come out of the moment, because you're expecting one thing and you get another, and now you have to deal with that, right? But again, that's because this ritual is in fact in place. So that's one definition of theater, is a public, performed ritual. We can also say that a play is a dramatic examination of a social conflict. You know, no matter how many characters there are in a play, plays tend to, in some way, gesture outward toward the world. So the problems and conflicts that are expressed in the play are not only rooted in the personality traits of the characters, but the characters are situated within their world in such a way that, in such a dramatic moment, that necessitates action. So something in the world is untenable, and in response, the characters act. And so, in that way, a play is about a social situation or a conflict, and the world that the characters live in is always a shadow of our own world. So part of the value of the play is that it reveals something about our own social reality. Also, in preparation for this talk, I, for the first time, looked up the word play in the dictionary. And two definitions I found were a stage representation of an action or a story, and a dramatic composition. Those are pretty good, I think, actually, so add that to the list. So the 5 working definitions I have right now, not that this is limited to anything, but certainly the ones that are currently swimming in my head are: a play is a dramatic composition, a play is a stage representation of an action or a story, a play is a dramatic examination of a social conflict, a play is a performed public ritual, and a play is an imitation of an action. So I think part of my difficulty in going from here as a practitioner is that those definitions leave me somewhat feeling cold. Like, I think they're really useful as guideposts, and I'm obsessed with them, but I'm also recognize that like they don't really inspire me to be like, yeah, dramatic examination of social conflict, go. That's not gonna like get me going as a writer, right? And so recognizing that that it needs something to sort of unearth my voice and to help me not only like see the guideposts but navigate myself down the path. And going back to the public ritual thing, that is what actually evokes the most interest for me when I think about practicing the craft. And it's funny because that definition is probably the most general. Again, like I said before, I don't think all public rituals are plays. And so the kind of worst definition seems to be like the most evocative, at least for me, in terms of how I can like get excited about practicing the craft and moving the form forward in some way. And I think the reason that that definition is exciting for me is because the idea of a performed public ritual evokes a real sense of an audience. If I think about a public ritual, I can't not think about who the audience is or that the audience is there, and that now I'm not seeing only the play through the like lens of the characters that I've created. I'm seeing the play as an event that's situated in the public sphere. And the characters are still there, and the plot is still there, and all the like crafty, cool stuff that I can try to do and show my, you know, skill and dedication as an artist are still there. But when I think about, you know, theater as a public ritual, I also think, okay, but they're there and they're in a theater, or at a theater, or at a performance space, right? And so, imaginatively speaking, I am now trapped in the same place the audience is trapped, which is I'm there watching the play. And I say trapped, I mean, obviously an audience can leave, but again, when you leave in the middle of a show, that's like kind of considered somewhat taboo. People do it all the time for different reasons. But if you like, you know, make the stand and like get up and leave, you're really saying something, right? Because you're, again, breaking your expected performance of the ritual. You're supposed to go and watch until it's over and then clap and then leave, right? And I think it's funny because I find sitting in the audience and watching plays that I don't like to be one of the most infuriating experiences in the world. I think it's absolutely brutal to be in an audience watching a play that, for whatever reason, you don't think is good, or you don't think is that you don't like, or that you don't vibe with, whatever you want to use. And I was like, why is it so? And also, of course, I mean, you know, again, we love to complain, but like, why is it that like when like, you know, theater people get together, it's so fun to like trash, you know, plays that we saw that we didn't like for whatever reason. And you know, I tried, of course. I don't think I do that like a lot, but like I certainly feel the inclination, and occasionally indulge. And I think one of the reasons why it's so viscerally upsetting to be in a play, watching a play, an audience member of a play that you don't appreciate, is that the message coming through implicitly is, this is the world. The playwright puts a world in front of you and actions in front of you, and whether or not it's said directly, this is a statement of who we are as a people. This is a statement of where we're going or where we shouldn't be going. This is a statement of how things happen, why things happen, all those things, right? The real core relationship in a play isn't just the relationship of the characters to each other or even the performers to the audience. I really think it's the playwright to the audience. That you have a story that you've put in front of people, that you've said, this represents us in some way, and they have to take it. And even if you don't agree, while you're there, you still have to, like, you're absorbing it, right? And so I think that's one of the reasons why it is so upsetting for me. And maybe it's also because I'm a playwright, so maybe that's that's part of the equation. But I don't think it's only that. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's something about the live nature of theater that just really concentrates the energy, right? And really makes it heightened kind of in both directions, good and also not so good at times. And so I find myself asking, like, how, what, when, where do I do with that energy? Recognizing that energy exists in myself, in the world. How do I hone it? How do I recognize it? How do I navigate it? And I guess for me, like, I see it as the only way to deal with it is to embrace it, like embrace the reality of that. So I think part of it is recognizing that, you know, if you're bold enough to decide to write a play, like, not to sort of hide behind, well, this might be the world, or this might be true. It's like, you know, like you're there saying something. And again, like, I'm hesitant to ever say anything definitively because I'm like, I might be wrong tomorrow and I'm gonna remember. But when you write a play, like, you are saying something. And so I think that, like, really embracing what your role is in that way and recognizing it is important, because at least you'll be entering an honest relationship, right, with the audience, as opposed to kind of like, you know, writing it and being like, oh, I don't know, it's just kind of, you know, happened, and then maybe I think that puts everybody in a difficult situation. Also, I think that, like, a play is not just a statement that the playwright's making, but it's also, like, really a conversation that you're having with the audience. And it might be kind of weird to think about that because, like, you're the one that wrote everything and then put it up there. You didn't really, like, you know, necessarily ask them to, like, write it with you. So doesn't seem to be like an equal kind of conversation, equal relationship. But I think that a conversation doesn't always happen with words. A conversation is also communication. It's listening. And I think I've just found the more I've written, the more I'm reminded how critical it is to listen. And by listen, I mean everywhere, all the time, every situation. Listening to what people are talking about, listening to how they talk about things, eavesdropping whenever possible, and constantly considering what conversations are in the world that you're entering, you know, when you write a play. And it's also the fact of when you are sitting in a theater, finding out, as I alluded to before, what is it that the audience is giving you in that moment, and do you like it? Like, do you enjoy the response that they're having? And I think that for whatever reason, I don't know that it's a good thing or a bad thing, but our model of new play development centers largely around, you know, workshops and readings, and, you know, feedback, which we're doing here, which is awesome and wonderful and very helpful when you have smart people doing it. But it is missing the component of a live audience that isn't necessarily people that know you or the play coming to watch it. It's a very different type of dynamic that you get when that happens, right? And so figuring out how you can, in your mind's eye, somehow anticipate that as the final form of what you're going for, right? As opposed to going for the approval of your closest peers only, or of yourself only, of your teachers only. But you're writing for this public ritual, this public event. How do you best do that? And then when you get in that moment and you're getting some type of um, not feedback as in people telling you after the show, oh, I didn't like that, but when you get the visceral like, ugh, or just silence, or laughing at things that you didn't think were funny, or people walking, whatever the response is, what does that response teach you? Because it's a different type of conversation that's being had there. It's not a intellectual conversation. It's really like an old brain conversation that's being had. And of course, it's up to us to analyze like why a response might be happening or what we want a response to be. But it's one of those things that really isn't undeniable. The response is the response, right? More confusing, the response also isn't the response. So I had this experience of working on a play, and I went to a production in a small theater, and there was this moment that just was not working. I could not figure out what to do, but it was not working. And I had never had this problem before. I've been working this play for like years and years, and I was talking to the director about it, and he was like, "Yeah, I think you should just try this, try that." And I was not there being protective. I was there trying to make it work. I was like, "Oh my gosh, yes, please, okay." I tried all this stuff, and something kind of works. Like it almost sort of worked, and at least it wasn't as bad as it was when I first watched it. I was like, "Okay, this is acceptable. I can watch this and not go home and be up all night worrying. So cool, we're good." And then I saw that same play in a different theater a couple months later, and I gave them the new rewrites I had done to fix that thing, and that didn't work at all. It was like total, bad, not happening. And then I gave them the original script, and it worked fine. There was no issues, no questions, no problem. And so my conclusion was basically, what? I was like, I think I'm never, ever going to know if something works. Like if I saw this happen, and I saw that happen, like I can't, there's no control group, it's totally how do I assess what works? And I guess the second conclusion I came to was, oh, they both kind of worked. They both worked for like the context that they were in. So there wasn't like a right solution. There were just all these different possible solutions. And I think that brings me to the final-ish point that I'm going to make, which is that, we're living in a time that our social reality is very fractured. And I think we're, for really as a human society, trying to figure out how do we move forward in a way that is cohesive, how do we solve worldwide problems in a way that is just and equitable, how do we survive as a species, how do we do it together, how do we do it without resorting to the sort of tried and untrue formula of, the most powerful wins, right? And we're stuck in these conflicts. How do we get ourselves out of this mode and recognizing the desire for justice for everyone and how to make that happen, right? And I do think that writing and theater has a lot to say about that because we're trying to figure it out and trying to see what it looks like. But when it comes to thinking about an audience, again, I said before, like I think my audience is me, and like I see the world this way, but does everybody else? No, everyone sees the world in their own way, and so I don't know that it's possible to look at an audience as a monolith, even if it would be convenient. It would be convenient to say, okay, the audience is just this. And so I think while there is sort of like an old brain like thing that happens when you're watching a performance where the audience can collectively become sort of like one organism. That does happen, right? But then, you know, you walk away and the way people interpret or you like what they take away from the work or how they feel about it is going to be different. No one is seeing everything the same way, right? And I don't think that's ever been the case, right? That we've had some kind of universal mass audience that all does the same thing at the same time. That actually would be kind of maybe a little scary if that happened. But, you know, we talk about like the origins of theater, we talk about like the Greek theater, right? And sometimes I think, man, it would be kind of easier if, like, you know, you're writing a play and everybody came to the play, the Dionysus festival, and everyone was like, you know, like they were part of the ritual, and they were all very drunk, and they were all like, they knew exactly what to do at what time, and they kind of knew the stories, and like there wasn't having to like educate them about this aspect of the world that you're trying to write about, and this and that. But then I'm like, wait a second, like that wasn't everybody in, you know, ancient Greece going to those plays. There was a very small fraction of like elite people, you know, that were there, right? And so we sometimes like give this wash, you know, to the way things might have been, and then it gives us a false sense of what things, you know, should be like. But I think that in closing, I think that theater audiences today are probably more healthy in a lot of ways than they've really ever been. And I don't say that to say that by any means things are perfect in terms of access, in terms of who is reached with the work and who isn't. But I think sometimes we have to, like, you know, expand our understanding of like who is seeing theater and how they're seeing theater, and how we can think about reaching them and what we really mean when we say we want to include people, right? So, you know, one example is that like in like conventional, you know, like you know, predominantly white institutions that are like our conventional theater institutions, there's oftentimes a lot of talk about how do we reach this audience, how do we reach that audience, you know. I'm writing a play about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you know, it's a Black play that really does deal with history and all these things, and there certainly will be like a Black audience there, but oftentimes when we're trying to like do outreach to audiences, and we act as if they're not seeing theater, and in fact, people are seeing theater. You know, Tyler Perry, sorry, made millions of dollars as a playwright, right? And there are many other black playwrights who make literally millions of dollars in for-profit theater to predominantly Black audiences, right? And we don't really consider them theater audiences per se in the mainstream theater because there are certain limitations about what types of work you can do with that kind of play, right? And so I think that a lot of writers, I would say Black writers like myself, or other writers like myself who, you know, may write for, you know, whatever cultural context they're writing for or towards, we still see ourselves, I see myself, I should say, as still part of a writing tradition that is about challenging norms and pushing forward ideas and creating new space for new ideas and all these things, right? And so there are like masses of people seeing plays, but they're not always like the savvy, cool, like innovative, form-altering plays. They're plays that people want to see, which is like people falling in love and people learning a lesson that makes them feel good, and really plays that oftentimes reinforce the status quo, right? And so I often have to ask myself, like, you know, do I want to reach people simply for the sake of reaching them? Or do I want to reach people in a way that I'm having a conversation that's different and it's going to change a perspective in some way, right? And all of these things are all simultaneously part of what is the theater. And I think that any given play can contain any number of strands of these different genres and ideas and things. And I hope that, that we as writers can really become very active, not only in as writing for audiences, but also as audience members. Like, think about what kind of audience you would want for your play, and how can you be that audience for others? You know, how can you show up for others in a way that that you would want people to show up for you in the theater? And I think that, like, our participation in that can really move the needle and keep moving the needle towards a theater that really is vibrant, diverse, challenging, exciting, different, sometimes bad, also fun. But in all of this, I think that the relationship between the audience and the playwright, recognizing that the playwright is also an audience member for their own play and others, if we see that relationship, that we will be able to move forward in a way that is more cohesive, and I hope that creates better art for all of us. Thank you very much. See you later.